Joining seems to have kind of slowed down a bit, so maybe we'll just go ahead and kick off. So welcome everyone. I'm Jen Bianco. I'm a senior manager with Deloitte's Global Employer Services Group and the co-chair of educational programming for the Women's Energy Network of Houston. I'll be your host today for the webinar, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker, Seema Menon. So on behalf of our WEN leadership team, we're pleased that you're all able to join us today for our webinar. These driven and talented women you see on the screen make up our WEN Houston board. They lead the teams and programs that make WEN the powerhouse organization that it is today. And as you may know, WEN is a not-for-profit organization, so we can't exist without the support of our sponsors, as well as those willing to volunteer their time. So thank you for all the sponsors keeping this organization thriving over the years. A big thank you to our national sponsors and our chapter sponsors and partners. For those that are new to WEN, WEN is an international organization with 20 chapters across the US and Mexico. We'll be opening new chapters throughout the US and be launching a chapter in Canada soon. We have over 6,000 members, and of those 6,000 members, 2,000 are here in Houston. Our mission is to drive unique programming that provides networking opportunities and fosters career and leadership development to women who work in the energy value chain. So now, to capitalize on our time together and networking opportunities here, we're going to set our first breakout session. So what will happen is we'll put you into a breakout room for you to network with a few of the colleagues here on the phone. You'll be given a 1-minute warning, and we have a little bit of a question here as we're focusing in on technology today. So a quick kind of discussion point that you guys can have after some of your introductions is, what technologies are you using today that you weren't using a year ago? So like I said, you'll get a 1-minute warning, and then we'll come back and go into our presentation with Seema. All right, I see we're all kind of coming back in together here. Hopefully you guys found that, made a few new connections and also had a good kind of starting teaser discussion around technology. And just making sure we've got everyone back in quite yet here. Looks like we're doing well here. 1 second. All right, so before we jump in, Seema's going to start sharing her slides here in just a moment, but while she does that, I'll just provide a quick introduction to her. So Seema joined Southwestern Energy in 2010 and is currently Vice President of the Business Information Services Organization. Prior to Southwestern, she was a management consultant with Accenture, where she delivered projects for several global Fortune 50 clients across multiple industries. She earned her undergraduate degree in Management Information Systems from the University of Houston. She is a self-proclaimed professional development junkie. Ask her about some of her favorite resources, which we'll have at the end here today, and enjoys spending time with her family, traveling, and volunteering in her local community. So with that, I'll hand it on over for Seema to walk us through her great content.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Jen. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect, and you can see my slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Excellent. Well, good afternoon. It looks like a lot of familiar faces, a lot of familiar names, so thank you guys for being here. As Jen stated, my name is Seema Menon. I am the Vice President of Business Information Services at Southwestern Energy. And so you'll hear me reference BIS, that is essentially information technology, also IT at a lot of other companies. So I am excited to spend this time with you guys in the next hour. I'd like for this to be as interactive as it can be. I know, everyone's used to and getting better with Zoom and all these video conferencing technologies. So feel free. I know Jen's going to help me out with questions. So for those of you that don't know me, I am obviously not just a professional, but I'm also a mother of 2 children. My kids are 7 and 9. And if you had told me this time last year, I remember we were talking about spring break and getting excited about maybe the rodeo and other things that were coming up for the year. And if you told me to just buckle up and get ready for not just a pandemic, but working from home for the next year, homeschooling, no travel, or very limited travel, right, and social distancing and all the things that we've experienced, and then pile on the things that happen just naturally, right, with the economy, oil prices dropping below zero and supply chains getting backed up. Let's sprinkle in now just, all sorts of political issues and social injustice taking front and center throughout the year. It's been quite a year in 2020, and it certainly continued, especially for those of you based here in Texas. It is top of mind right now, right, what we just went through last week. And so it's a lot. So I want to just start out by acknowledging that. In our networking session we just had, we were talking about how much technology has really even changed this experience for the better in a lot of great ways, because you're kind of forced to change. And I'm sure we've all heard the term, change is the new constant, right? Like that's all you can expect and be prepared for is constant change. And I will tell you, what comes with that is fatigue, and that fatigue is real. And so my hope today is that, after the snowpocalypse of Texas experience last week, we all have this newfound appreciation for the internet and being connected to people. And hopefully you're all even feeling re-energized. I know I am, about just the value of energy and what we all, the industry that we contribute to and how important that is. A colleague of mine actually posted, and I was sharing this with the group earlier, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so it's funny how, while it doesn't show up there, things like the basic necessities of food and water and shelter and safety, energy is a big part of that, right? And I think for those of us that have gone without power for days or water for days, and you can't get your cell phone to work and you can't get to the internet, you just have this newfound appreciation and for the things that we take for granted every day. So first off, with everything I just covered, it's a lot. I really want to sincerely thank you guys for spending the next hour here, not just focusing on, hopefully you gain something for yourself and some insights, but just choosing this time to support our industry and thinking about ways we can strengthen it. We've got some work to do. It's been a rough, few years for us, and so I'm going to talk more about that. But I hope you leave here inspired and energized, and that each of us, just if you're a catalyst for change, even if it's something small, it's amazing how the ripple effect of that. And so that's my hope for each of you guys. So let me flip ahead here, because I'll just keep talking. So what I want to cover today and talk about is, certainly for those of you that are not familiar, I'm hoping you'll get introduced to some new technologies that you maybe heard about or it's a buzzword. So we'll talk about that, but I really want to start with why is this important for our industry, just to level set, right? And I know we've got a mixed audience here. Some of you are from an E&P company, some of you study and focus on the markets or in consulting. We've got folks from, upstream, downstream, you name it. So I'm excited in some of the engagement and perspectives that we have and how they may differ as well. But thank you guys for being here. We'll talk about technology. What's most important is let's really talk about what do we do with that technology and how do we leverage it and use those tools to our advantage, not just for our industry, not just for your company, but even for you, right, as an individual, right? Because the reality is, and we've all experienced it in the last year, whether we expected to or not, we probably use technology more than we ever have in our personal lives as well as professionally. And so that momentum is just going to continue. And there's no doubt in my mind, we talked about telehealth in my networking session earlier and how the convenience of being able to, video chat with a doctor or go through a drive-through to conduct my testing or whatever it is, those are the things that we hope stick around. And I guarantee you we've all experienced, things and opportunities like that in the workplace that we hope will continue to stick around because they're productive and they're helpful. And there's certainly times where I want to be in the room with people and I want to connect in that way, but there's also some really great digital alternatives and tools. So I want to talk about that as well as what you can do for yourself to even develop your own skill set. And again, there's a lot out there, but I think there's such a unique opportunity for developing your own digital skills, is what I'd like to call them, to then turn that into a unique advantage for yourself. And almost, what I like to tell my kids is, develop that and strengthen that muscle and it becomes now your superpower, or one of the things that you become known for. So we'll talk about that as well. So I know we'll sprinkle in some questions and polling throughout this discussion, and I know Jen's got a chat going. So if you guys have questions, feel free to put your questions into the chat, and I will definitely try to pause throughout and stop and answer any questions that you guys have. So I want to start with talking about some of the industry challenges. And if you're paying attention to the news or, just hallway conversations, which I know feel a little bit different, but especially this last week, you probably heard energy in the news more than you have in the past, couple of months. We have definitely seen some hard times, right? And so that's not just, that didn't just come with 2020. I think, for those that have been in the industry for a long time, you've experienced some of the cycles. But I will tell you, I've been in the industry for quite some time, and this just feels different, right? We've seen, not just the demand for energy shift in the last year, but we've seen thousands of jobs disappearing in the industry. We've heard, kind of the headlines typically tend to be, and as you can see on the slide here, we're enduring uncertainty, and resilience is really, really important, and the need to transform is important. But what I think is different and why it feels different is this isn't just a matter of repositioning and adjusting. I think we're all in the middle of having to really reinvent ourselves. No different than each of us have had to a little bit of, how are we going to connect with our friends and our family and our colleagues now that I'm working from home and I may have kids or something else, real life happening in the background. And so we've probably, whether it was intentional or not, had to make some sort of an effort or intentional effort to be present and adopt and make it work, if you will. And it may have been a struggle in the beginning, and now it's old hat, right? And here we all on a Zoom call. I mean, these sessions alone are a great example. These used to only be a in-person luncheon type of experience, right? So as an IT leader, I have to admit that the word digital can sometimes bother me because it implies that there's this magical technology that's out there, and you just got to press the easy button and it's going to fix everything. And the one thing I want to highlight here is that digital and anything digital and technology is just a tool, and that the real magic and the real value comes from when we get the right humans together that have the right skills and a solid understanding of our business, and all that comes together to put that technology to work. And so I'm sure you've all heard that before, but the ways we've seen that and they're showing up today in our industry, and we actually had some good conversations in our group, and hopefully you guys heard these themes as well in the networking earlier. But we're able to enable remote operations so that you're able to now operate in the field with a leaner or more skeleton crew and get things done safely, right? Social distancing in the field is not an easy thing to accomplish. We've got folks that can now analyze hundreds of thousands of land leases in a matter of minutes, as opposed to having to thumb through physical files like they have historically. And I know we've seen HR being able to utilize, things like a lot of our electronic signature solutions and things like that to onboard hundreds of employees in less than 24 hours, and they can have no contact with those individuals, right? And you can't get people in a room and hand them packets or things like that you may have done in the past. And so for some of those, we can thank COVID for expediting and kind of forcing some of that forward, and us moving where we may have just dabbled in it before. But my hope is that, let's not just leave that type of, innovation or just even that thought process and that urgency. Let's not just use COVID as the excuse, right? As an industry, we have an opportunity, and we really have to do this. Now is the time to continue that energy and carry it forward to help us get through the cycle that we're in right now, right? Because, again, I don't think some of the challenges that we're seeing and the expectations of how technology continues to mature, it's growing exponentially, right? And it's going to continue. So I think one of the key things here, and I want to reinforce, is that the people that have the skills to make that change happen, they're on this call right now, right? It's every single one of us. We can't just rely on our data scientists and our IT folks, or the folks that are the technologists and have the official titles. It is really, it's on every single one of us to adopt and learn how to really, just make things work in this environment. But we've really got to carry that forward to say, hey, let's continue to look at how do we solve these problems. And again, it's not just about the technology, but looking at it with the human lens and then developing the skills so that we can do that, right? So before I get into talking about the tools and talking about all the technologies and the fun stuff that I will geek out on, I do want to talk about why this is really important for, or what gets in our way is what I should say, right? Because technology has been a big part of our industry for many, many years. And in some areas, we are absolutely on the cutting edge. And you hear about that around big data and things like that, that our industry has been doing really well. But I can tell you from personal experience, and, I grew up in consulting and started my career there. And I ended up shifting, my focus from just system integration into change management and the people side of technology. And I loved it because it was such an area of opportunity that a lot of folks just did not focus on. It's easy to put a tool out there and make it available and just kind of hope people come and adopt it and take advantage of it, right? But for those of you that have been in the industry in a long time, you can hand an iPad out to somebody and it will become a very expensive paperweight very quickly if you don't focus on the people side of that, right? Folks are going to stick to their big chief tablets or whatever it is that they know works, and they're going to continue to make it work that way unless you really get their input and engage them. And so I want to talk a little bit about, this phrase, do more with less, because I know we've all heard it, some variation of it. Like I said, not new to our industry. And if you're on my team, you've probably heard me say this at least 1,000 times in the last couple of years. And I want to make sure we think about that more from not just doing less with less investment. The reality is we're having to do things with fewer people. Just time is a commodity that there's just never enough of. And no one would have thought we'd be working remotely for an extended period of time and having to make things work and keep the lights on and keep our operations running seamlessly. And so the question around, how do you focus on margins? How do we focus on, doing more and generating more value with what we have is really just by not letting that be a hindrance, but embracing that challenge, just as we have by working remote for extended periods of time, and finding new ways to look at things. And so, that's not new information, but I want to highlight something real quickly here. If you guys are looking at the screen, the blue box shows just a snapshot, and I believe I pulled this from a Deloitte Insights article. You'll notice the list of occupations there. There's not an IT professional listed, right? And the reason for that is, I thought that was really interesting because I expected to see some data science and those types of jobs listed here, because those are certainly growing and becoming higher and higher demand. But if you look at the skill sets over to the right, you'll notice that the skill sets that they're looking for are analytical skills and programming skills and the ability to utilize math and calculations and statistics and things like that in roles that traditionally you don't think of as needing that skill set. But this is just another example of many of us are wearing more hats than we ever have had to in the past. And so it's happening at a very quick pace, quite frankly, right? Over the years, you may have just started to extend your role or expand your role. And so you don't see a lot of the traditional, hey, this is my lane and this is what I'm going to stay in anymore. That's happening today, right? And so one of the key things I want to highlight is that's just only going to continue to grow. As more technology advances, we all have to up our game. We all have to make sure we're staying on top of what's going on, and then really figure out how do I put that to use in my role, right, or for my team or for my organization. So a lot of what my team, I know we've been focused on, and at Southwestern, we've been focused on how do I get more of either technology I already have, which I will tell you, a lot of times we're just scratching the surface. Even this video conferencing call, it's amazing what capabilities we have in just Zoom alone, right? That we continue to see advanced with each day, right? New functions and features are popping up constantly. How do we challenge the status quo and how do we challenge the way we do things today as well, is another question that we should all be asking ourselves. So that we could take full advantage of, again, the investments and the technology around us. And then the other thing I would challenge us to even think about, I know my team has done this quite a bit as well, is you don't always have to just limit your thinking to what you have and what you know, right? And so if you're not thinking about, is there an opportunity for me to maybe even swap out something that I used to use and that works well, got me from point A to point B, but, again, if the rate of change with technology, is there something out there that I could probably swap out that does more, costs me less, and again, generates a lot more value and it's easier for people to adopt, and those technologies are out there. And so, again, many of you are probably already doing this. You may have experienced, using technologies, and I'll talk more about that later, but I think those are questions that we should constantly be asking ourselves, right? And even if it's not necessarily something you experience or that you own in your role, hopefully if you experience something, and I go back to telehealth as an easy example, once you experience like, wow, that's a better way to do that, how do I translate that into my life, right? Or how do I translate into something in my organization that I know we could do differently? And so I think it's starting with that mindset and hopefully, again, not letting it be a limiting factor, but an opportunity to really just look at things with a different lens, as well as inviting other people into those conversations, right? And so that's really my other thought process that I want to highlight is adoption. And it's something that I think we all probably think about this as consumers. And so if you're an iPhone user, part of the reason why that's so such a popular tool for folks to use and why it caught on, right, is just its ease of use and I'm going to be an IT geek, but its user interface and the experience that you have is just so simple and intuitive. And the reality is we all expect that now, right? Not just as consumers, but in the workplace, right? And I'm sure you've experienced that yourselves. And so it's things like that and taking into consideration that for the first time in many, many years, we actually have 5 generations within the workforce. And so I want to stop, and I don't want to talk about every single one of these, but if you look at that graphic over there to the bottom right, you will see that, you know, there's certainly some traditionals still left, traditionalists certainly in our industry that are still around and doing some incredible things, actually, and then all the way to Gen Z, right? And so if that means anything to you, there is such a clash and a difference, even distinctly between each and one of those generations and how they work, what they're focused on, what drives and motivates them. And that's a whole science in and of itself, another topic we could absolutely talk about. But what I want to highlight is it's really important to be mindful of that, that if we're going to introduce new tools or new technologies or even new processes, that we're very mindful of the human element, because that's typically the one thing that's easy to ignore, right? And if we're not thinking about the people that are involved and the processes or even the behavioral changes that are an important part of us realizing the value we think we're going to get out of something, we will completely miss the value, right? You just won't get what you need. And it goes back to think about the iPad that becomes an expensive paperweight. It's no different. So I'll pause before I jump into, I know we've got some polling questions. Any questions that have come up or popped up, Jen?
Yeah, we have one question, I think, about kind of how they might learn more about some digital transformation. So one question we have from Rhonda Bullard is, do you have any digital transformation conferences that your team attends specific to energy?
Yes, yeah, actually, well, there are quite a few that are specific to energy. And I'm trying to think about off the top of my head. I will...
we can add those to the resource.
Yeah, to the resources, and I'd like to share that with you guys because I don't want to butcher names, but there are several conferences out there that are focused on digital technology, and not just from an IT lens, certainly broader for the industry, right? So whether it's real-time analytics, things like that. And then I tend to find a lot of value in, like I've seen some of the like Society for Petroleum Engineers and those types of events. They're not just for petroleum engineers, right? I like to sit in and listen to some of those for myself just to understand what is happening in the field and getting a lot of access to academics and some of the things that they're even trying and testing. And a lot of us have had to get creative. I know there's consortiums. So I'll name a few. Actually, I'm going to talk about blockchain. There's a blockchain consortium for energy as well that comes to mind. There's several others that I'll try to plug throughout here. That's a good question. But there is a lot out there. It's amazing what, if you Google consortiums, that's usually a good place to start. And then a lot of times they're speaking at some of those digital events. And then you typically see a lot of the consulting companies that host events and things like that will host sessions that are very focused on energy, and sometimes even to upstream or downstream, depending on where you are in the value chain.
All right, and we got one more question before we move on. This is about the adoption of technology. Do you find that it's driven from the C-suite, operations, digital departments, or anywhere else? Where is it best driven?
No, great question. So I've seen it really come from both, right? So I've seen it from the C-suite where they're saying, hey, no, we have to do this differently. But I will tell you, and I feel like what I tend to see happen, which again is important, but it's more of a method that it's organic, is when a need comes from the field or in a corporate office interacting with someone in the field, and they find that need or that niche, and it may start small, and then it very quickly snowballs into they tried something and it worked, and now it's growing and it's taken effect. And I'll talk more about that, of where I've seen that, certainly within Southwestern. and how we're still working to do that. And in my mind, again, thinking about the human element, to me, that's where the most value usually comes from, is when it's someone's idea and it's a true business problem they were trying to solve, and then the use cases just grow, right, and the adoption grows very quickly.
Awesome. That's all we have right now, but I'll keep monitoring.
Perfect. So I think we're going to jump to a polling question. So I will pause here for us to quickly get some of your answers, because I'm interested in hearing from you guys. Before we talk about technologies, what are some of the technologies that have helped you, you personally, or in your career or your organization? What have you seen? And this is definitely a multiple choice. You can answer and select more than one. Looking forward to seeing what you guys say. And it's okay if the answer is, I'm not familiar with any of these. So Jen, I may need your help here. I can't see when the poll is closed.
All right. So we're about halfway through, but we're seeing a lot of people looking at data visualizations and business intelligence, followed by data science. I think we can go ahead and probably close the poll.
Perfect.
So our results will pop up. All right.
Okay.
Lots of business intelligence and data visualizations.
I know. Well, good. I'm glad that's one of our topics that we'll cover. Well, good. So this is interesting. So it gives me a sense of even just some of our audience, and this doesn't surprise me. I mean, 70% of folks are familiar with business intelligence and data visualization. I mean, that's something we're probably all doing, whether we realize it or not. If you've ever used or created a pivot table, you fall into that category, right? So this is interesting. I'm going to go through each of these technologies. I'll spend a little bit more time. I mean, I could, again, do a session on every single one of these topics, but happy to take any questions that you guys have. I want to start with the tools that are near and dear to our hearts. We all use these each and every day. And they're easy to kind of just gloss over or take for granted because they're, tools we use every day, right? So when I think about productivity and collaboration tools, of course, what comes to mind for most of us are the, using Microsoft Teams or WebEx or Zoom like we're on right now for video conferences. But what you are finding more often, and I know I'm certainly trying to do more of this even within Southwestern, is how do I take advantage of the suite of tools that are becoming available? And we have seen, I will tell you just from as an IT professional, things like Zoom and WebEx and Microsoft, even just their investment in collaboration tools in the last year, I mean, it's just grown exponentially, right? So if you're a user or you've never used Teams before, even though it was probably available in your organization a year ago, you're probably pretty well versed in it, more than you expect it to be after having to work remote for an extended period of time. And so in a world where travel restrictions probably won't change anytime soon, the concept of social distancing, we're going to continue to have to find creative ways to connect with each other. And so I think what's easy to kind of gloss over, again, the day-to-day productivity tools, I don't think they'll ever 100% replace just us being able to connect and having an unplanned hallway conversation. But it's pretty impressive how much you can help and utilize these tools to boost not just your own productivity, but your teams, right? And so one thing I challenge you guys to think about is, I don't want to get too much into the specifics because there's so many tools and technologies that are out there. And again, this is changing, with every day. But if you have not played around with, if you have Teams or some sort of a digital workspace, some of you that may show up as even like your intranet in your corporate environment that you use that's interactive, it's not just kind of a one-way communication tool. Some of you may be using project management or task management tools like Slack or Monday.com or something smaller within your individual teams. But they basically, a digital workspace is any type of technology that lets you combine things like your chat technologies or file sharing, or just any type of knowledge management, or I don't know, I may age myself a little bit. If you guys remember the days of like the wiki threads and things like that, you know, that type of capability is being found in one place, right? And so if you use Office 365 personally or professionally, you're familiar with, you know, exactly what I'm talking about, right? Where those types of technologies allow you, they're cloud-based, they allow you to pick up where you left off. You know, if you were at home working on something, and then you go and pick up your tablet somewhere, and you can keep working seamlessly. And it's pretty impressive, the capabilities that you have beyond just file sharing, and you know, we were all familiar with Dropbox and Box and tools like that. But when you combine that type of capability with the other suite of tools that you use day in, day out, Outlook, for example, email, it's pretty impressive what you can do. What I find, though, is that we tend to, you know, those tools are very intuitive, and so we may not take the time to actually sit down and take some real basic training on how to take full advantage of the capabilities. And so at a minimum, what I would, some of you maybe were forced to do that, right, after you were having to work from home and take advantage of these tools. But I would challenge each and every one of us, right? I know this with my own team. I know we try and utilize these different tools to see, you know, how can we get more out of them? How do we take greater advantage of? And even if it just means, hey, I get a handful fewer emails a day, to me that makes it worth it, right? And so I would challenge each of us to, it's easy to kind of, like I said, take these things for granted, but I think there's a lot that can be done. And again, even if it's not something you have access to today, I would encourage you, go talk to your IT organization, go talk to your folks and your colleagues across the organization that may be using these tools in pockets or that you've heard about, and learn more about it and see if that's something that you could take advantage of in your day-to-day.
I've got a question about 3 things that might be most important when deciding on a new tool. I think that's kind of across the board as I read the question. It's not necessarily just collaboration, but I guess maybe some decision requirements as it can get overwhelming when you're looking at different things.
Yep, no, that's a great question. And so I'll try not to, I can't help but wear my IT hat, so I'm going to answer it with that perspective. I think scalability is really, really important, right? So if one team is going to use it, and again, we're all trying to do more with what we have, what you don't want in your environment is 16 different tools that overlap in some way, shape, or form, and then now they're also not connected and talking. So being able to use a tool that can scale up or down with your organization is really, really important. Obviously, the kind of obvious, the features and the capabilities are another factor, right, of what do you want to do with this and what value do you want? And that's usually where we start, right? Let's be honest, it's like, what are the things that it can do for me? But I think, you know, adoption, and so how easy or difficult is it for folks to use it, and really being intentional about thinking about the stakeholders that really, you know, so I'm thinking about for in my world, it's not just what works for my office users, but we are constantly having to think about what works for my folks in the field, and can they also take advantage of that, whether it's, you know, they're disconnected or they've got limited connectivity in the field to be able to interact or utilize that technology. And then lastly, I mean, I have to make a plug for it, but you have to think about security and cybersecurity. And so that is something that impacts every single one of us. Fortunately, you know, there's lots of advantages, and a lot of the things that we used to use to share files, like USBs, that are not the most secure, you know, ways of sharing data. There's a lot more security tools available, but it's something that it's also easy to take for granted because it's so easy to share information that you really have to be mindful about what you're sharing, how you're sharing it, and who you're sharing that with. And so that has to also come in and put a little bit of a safety net, is how I like to think of it. It shouldn't be a barrier, but it should be a consideration, because the energy industry is unfortunately a target and continues to be a target. And if you guys heard about the SolarWinds incident that made the news, and you know, people thought that was like a government problem, and the reality is now it impacted several, you know, industries, and that's actually how that, you know, that type of a cyber event starts typically. So, so that's something that I think is also really important to keep in the back of your minds. Okay, good question. So I want to shift gears here and talk about some of the stuff that you may not be as familiar with, some of the technologies. And so, you know, this little robot guy here, I want to talk about him. He doesn't have a name, but I'm sure many of you, if you're familiar with bots, have had the opportunity to name them and have some fun with them. But the reality is most of us are already familiar with the concept of having to work smarter, not harder, having to work with a smaller team, and unfortunately a lot of times with the changes that we've seen in the industry or someone leaving a team, there's not a whole lot of time for a handover, and there's not a whole lot of time to streamline and simplify processes. And what excites me about this technology is it's actually fairly simple, and it sounds complicated, like the concept of a bot, but for those that are not familiar with RPA, it's basically software that allows you to automate a process, and the simpler the process, the better. But it can be as complicated as having to interpret data from a form or an application that you may be using. It can allow you, or it can be set up to process transactions. So you typically, you can see automation in accounting and with accounting systems quite often. Anytime you're just processing data, especially high volumes of data, but you can even use it just to reply to emails, right? And things like that. So whether you guys realize it or not, you've probably talked to a bot. You may not like to admit it or realize it. If you've ever had to reach out and use the customer service chat feature, you've probably interacted with a bot and don't even know it. And so it's pretty impressive technology, and it certainly can get complicated, but we are seeing a lot of this in our industry. I know I'm excited. We've certainly been using it here at SWEN, and I know there's a lot more opportunity to do more with it. But some of the ways we're using it at Southwestern is, I know, actually we were talking in our networking group earlier, the small group, we're using it to process invoices. We're using it to even do some three-way matching of invoices to make sure and eliminate any type of human involvement. So you're looking at a purchase order and you're comparing that to an invoice and trying to do some sort of match in. And if there's an exception that says, hey, I do need a human to take a look at this, now I'm only spending my time looking at those exceptions and not looking at thousands and thousands of transactions or invoices. So there's several different types of bots, and the one thing I will say, there's unattended bots, there's hybrid bots, and I don't want to get too much into the technical side of it, but what I will share with you is, I've heard this comment before, and I want to address it with you guys, is, well, we don't want bots taking over jobs entirely, and my question or my challenge to that would be, why not, right? Because if the bots are just focused on the day-to-day minutia, the stuff that is, it's mundane and it's kind of the boring stuff that we got to do, and it's just transactional, and it's a lot of the repetitive same old activities, why wouldn't you want a bot to take care of that so you can focus on the exciting things, right, and the challenging things that are out there, and the problems that take a little bit more time to solve and energy to solve, and pulling people together. And so, like I said, I see we're scratching the surface on this technology, and I think there's a lot more value that can be found, and especially, like I said, in any part of the industry that you're in. Again, a lot of times people tie this to customer service or a customer-facing type of function, and I mean, I could see this working on the regulatory side. If you're having to pull reports down from a third-party site or a vendor or things like that and process that data, and that's something you have to do daily or weekly or monthly, it sounds like a great opportunity to look into see if some sort of bot technology can be used for that. If you're consolidating spreadsheets and reports, things like that, that's how you typically will see them used. I know there's several tools out there, so if you guys are not familiar with the bot technology, you can actually go out and purchase software and suites of tools. UiPath is one that's commonly used. If you have not heard of Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, those are some of the popular ones. So if you're interested in learning more, I'd probably start with just Googling and checking out some of those. One of the things I know that the technology we use here at SWEN, one of the things I'm so excited about is I don't have a bunch of bot developers sitting in my organization. We have a handful of folks that are familiar with the technology, but the bot development itself actually happens and it's done by business users. And so certainly we're there supporting them. There's an environment for them to play and for them to experiment with. But the real value and the magic that I was talking about earlier comes from when those folks say, hey, I'd like to see if this will work for this. And I'd like for this system to pull data from this system and see what I can make happen. And that dabbling has turned into some really extraordinary opportunities. And that's the snowball effect I was talking about earlier. And so my challenge to each of you guys is you probably have in your organization someone that's thinking about this, if not already dabbling with it. And so I would encourage each of you to explore it because, 2-3 years ago, this probably wasn't as popular. And now it's pretty commonplace. A lot of folks have some version of bot technology that's in use in their environment, but it's not always talked about. And it unfortunately can have a little bit of a negative connotation. And I would encourage folks to not look at it that way. So that's a fun one. I won't talk about everything on the slide, but some of the examples on the boxes here basically how you can see bot technology being used. So I don't want it to just be limited to transactional. There's certainly some intelligence that can be built into them as well. So some really exciting opportunities, I think, here in the near future for RPA.
So we've got another quick question around RPA and automation. So the question is around the strategy for automation. Is there a formal strategy in place, or how are you organized to support that automation within the organization?
Within SWN, I will tell you, it's probably been more, we've taken like we're calling it a center of excellence or a community of practice type of approach, so that it's a little bit more organic. And the reason is because the value comes out of, hey, I have this business need, and then pairing it with the technology to see, hey, well, how can this technology be utilized to further automate it within a business process or within a function. And so we've dabbled in it and have some really good stories, but I know I intended to push it harder this year and do some more cascading, but again, we'll still take that approach as opposed to just saying, hey, this business process, X, Y, must be fully automated, because that's not necessarily organic or natural, right? Because again, now you're forcing the tool upon people in a process that may or may not be a good fit for it. So I do want to be a bit more intentional about it and push a bit harder. And I think we've got some really good use cases. So I think I want to build on that momentum, and that's how we approach it as WEN. But what I would say is if that's not an approach or you're not hearing about it in your organization, I would encourage folks to ask. Because again, it may be being used in pockets, and it may not have made it to your function. But I know there's several examples I can think of in accounting, but I know there's a lot more of these that we're seeing used in the field and in operations, and I know the sky's the limit.
Thanks. I think that's all the questions we've got on automation now.
Okay, good. So I will switch gears here to the big winner that most of you are familiar with, the concept of business intelligence. And so a lot of times business intelligence is kind of oversimplified or described as just your reporting tools, right? So, business intelligence certainly can show up in the form of an Excel spreadsheet and pivot tables, but it is pretty impressive what you can do with some of the business intelligence tools that are available today. Some of you, if you're familiar with Spotfire, Tableau, you've seen some of the data visualization tools, but business intelligence is really about being able to take some sort of, just take an organized data is how I'll describe it, and then being able to translate that into some sort of an insight, right? So some sort of a, hey, I'm looking at a trend over a period of time, and I notice a dip here, and we think it's tied to this data point, right? And so a lot of times it's easy to take data that's well-structured, that came from an application or a system or a report that is existing, and combining that with other data to create those insights. Like I said, if you've ever seen a Spotfire report or a Tableau report, you're familiar with the value of the bubble charts and the waterfall diagrams and all sorts of different ways of presenting information to tell a story. And so it doesn't surprise me that 70% of you have seen that utilized, and if you're not actually using that day in, day out in just about any role, I can't imagine just about any job that's not using it. And if you're not seeing it used heavily within your group, I would challenge you to think about how you can, right? Because again, if you're spending a bunch of time on your monotonous pulling information from everywhere and not really thinking about what can I do with that information, what is that information telling me, that's a missed opportunity. And so this is a skill set that I think, I mean, I'm impressed at even how my kids are building PowerPoints and stuff like that at 9 years old. So this is a skill set that I think is just evergreen for all of us. And it's not just about building a better pivot table, like I said. I know we're starting to introduce and utilize Power BI in our environment. And again, that's just another business intelligence tool, but it's pretty impressive what you can do. And there's a ton of training out there. You can actually there's free versions of it. Power BI is a Microsoft tool. And so it integrates well and looks and feels a lot like Excel, which makes it feel very intuitive. And so you don't have to go learn another, programming language or something like that to use it. And so it's one of those things that, again, it's just a tool, but when you connect it with the right, well, either problem or data, it is pretty incredible what you can do and the stories that you can tell and the insights that you can gain. And so that's something I want to tout. Is it's easy to kind of dismiss it to, oh, that's just reports, that's boring, right? And so it's actually pretty exciting, some of the visuals and the impact you can have with that. I want to touch on briefly as well the concept of data science and how it's different, because I think a lot of folks certainly are familiar with the term, and it is actually a pretty complex area, and it's growing within our industry, which is really, really exciting and has been. And data science, in my mind, is more, and the way I look at it is taking volumes and volumes of what's typically unstructured data, which basically means it may be organized in that I may have a bunch of time and time-related data from a sensor, right? But just looking at that data by itself doesn't tell me a whole lot, right? But when I pair all that information with information from multiple sensors, information about the environment, whether it's temperature or time of day or things like that, age of the assets that I'm utilizing, that's where you can do a lot more just deeper analysis and start to put together using math and statistics and all sorts of computer science, and that's where the programming aspect comes in, where you can start to build and better understand insights and make connections that you may not have made on your own, right? So sometimes it just helps you highlight an anomaly, and sometimes it doesn't tell you a whole lot of anything that you didn't already know, right? So so it's really an interesting and exciting area. And again, a lot of times we think this has to sit with just our data science groups, but what you'll find is, really being able to marry the data science capabilities with a business problem that you're struggling with, and just really exploring the opportunities there is where the magic happens again, right? So I know at Southwestern we're using it for, certainly, real-time activities and from a drilling and completion standpoint, and how do we improve what we are doing out in the field in our day-to-day operations. But they're even applying it to some of our health and safety and environmental data, right, that we have, and what is that telling us? And with the intent of let's turn that into something predictive. How do we get in front of, something that could be coming, right? How do we better mitigate our risks? And so one thing I would say is I'm not suggesting everyone needs to go out and start taking Python courses, and you certainly can, right? That's out there, but I think just at a minimum understanding what data science is, what's involved in that. So that you can even just go have a conversation with some of the folks that are in your, that are data scientists or in that part of your organization. It's pretty impressive. I mean, A, they're typically brilliant minds, and then B, some of what they're able to do and some of the things they're working on can be pretty fascinating. So I would encourage, I think that's going to continue to, versions of data science are going to start to translate into many of our day-to-day jobs, because as you advance how you're able to analyze data and the analytics capabilities of tools like Power BI, it starts to very quickly translate into, oh, What else am I not seeing? This is with the data that I know is structured and tells me this story. What else am I not, understanding from this? And so I would encourage each of you guys to look at it that way. One of the examples I like to give when I'm trying to explain this concept to like my family or something is if you have a smartwatch, like my dad has a Fitbit, he doesn't even have an Apple Watch, he likes his Fitbit. And the concept of the Fitbit being able to collect your steps, the time of day that you're getting those steps in, your heart rate, your sleep patterns, all that type of data, that's structured data for the most part, but when you combine all that together, it starts to tell you a bit of a story, right? And it can, and data science technology, right? As a consumer, you're interested and you're using that today, right? It may tell you, hey, you should probably get a little bit more sleep, or we noticed that we tend to see you doing this when you're binge watching on Friday nights. You got to stop doing that because that's messing you up, right? Or things like that. So it's pretty exciting. I think the opportunities of what's to come, we still have yet to see it, but there's a lot in this area, and I'm certainly not an expert. But a lot that we're going to continue to see in this area. So before I shift to emerging technologies, Jen, any questions?
Yeah, we've got another question here. I'm not sure, you might actually be getting to some of this in the next slide or two. So are we seeing the end to Excel and emails and invoices thanks to BI tools or other technologies such as blockchain?
Yeah, I don't know that we'll see the end of those in like the next 5 years, but I do absolutely think we will start to see less use of email, for example, or even Excel. I don't know that Excel is going to go away anytime soon, just because so many of us love it. But you will see a lot more Excel-like type of tools that I think are being used more commonly to tell a story. And again, especially as things like the technology of bots and they're getting away from us just spending time and effort collecting information and really us spending our time and energy making sense of that data and what does it tell us and actioning on that information. So I do think, yes, we will see that, and none of us are going to miss email, right? I mean, we'd much rather translate that into some sort of productivity, right? And I think a lot of times you are seeing teams take things out of what could have been an email or even what, is no longer a meeting and is being addressed in a chat thread in Teams or something like that.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to talk about emerging technologies because this one, and there's a lot of stuff that's listed here. And I'm not going to be able to talk about everything and do it all justice, but I do want to touch on these technologies because while they're called emerging technologies, we've probably seen or you're familiar with some version of these as a consumer, if you have not already utilized it or experienced it within our industry. So I want to touch on those, and I'm sure there's lots of questions here, but one thing that continues to come up and I see used interchangeably is the concept of machine learning or artificial intelligence. And a lot of times you guys will see data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence all just kind of get thrown into one area. And the reality is they're all very distinct sciences and technologies. But part of what you're seeing is, something may be called artificial intelligence, but the reality is it's probably more machine learning than it is, full-blown sophisticated artificial intelligence. So an example of what comes to mind is, you guys know this, and we actually use these technologies today, right? If you've ever used Alexa or Siri or a Google Assistant, the reality is you are interacting with a computer, right? And with a machine that has learned either over time some of the behaviors in your household, right? I was joking around with a friend the other day, and we were talking about like Kids Bop or something, and we were watching a video. That's what it was. And it triggered Alexa in the background and starts playing the Kids Bop playlist that I never went in there and intentionally set up in Alexa. It's learned over time, right? It's interesting and a little scary, but kind of exciting as well, right? And so we've all experienced it. You've seen and heard about the self-driving cars. That's that same technology that we're seeing show up and is on the roads today, right? And so that technology, we're just scratching the surface. And so there is certainly more opportunity there. And I know a lot of our organizations are looking at how do we use things like a voice assistant and things like that and merge them into our business processes today so that, they may be showing up of combining machine learning or some sort of artificial intelligence with a wearable so that our folks in the field that are doing work that need to be hands-free are still able to get information or communicate with folks hands-free in a safe manner, and utilize that type of technology. So it's out there today, and I think there's a lot more opportunity. We're going to see this grow exponentially. Just as you're seeing it as a consumer, you'll start seeing it translate more in the field and in our day-to-day operations. Excuse me, if you're familiar with cryptocurrency, you're familiar with blockchain. So that's a real simple way of describing how blockchain works. I had mentioned earlier, there's a friend of mine, Rebecca Hoffman, who I've worked with, and we've had that consortium come out here. I think it used to be called something else, and it's leaving me, but it's now called Blockchain for Energy Consortium. I know Southwestern, we have quite a few folks that stay close to some of the really impressive use cases that they are working to really move forward blockchain technology for the industry. And this is upstream, downstream, you name it. But some really, really impressive use cases that some of our industry peers are using, and that it's still very much we're learning and trying to figure out. So I wouldn't say there's one type of blockchain technology that I would recommend you go look into. But I'd probably start with the consortium, look at some of the use cases. Again, some of this you guys may already be using in your organizations, and you may not know about it. They're experimenting with it. But some of them are actually using them in real time today. So there are realistic use cases. So it's not just a concept anymore. And it's pretty exciting. I think, there's opportunities with contracts. There's opportunities with tracking like water logistics and things like that. Tracking your assets from where it was manufactured all the way to the end of its life cycle and kind of wear and tear and capabilities like that. So I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, to check that out. And it's amazing just by reading a little bit what you can learn and some of the ideas that can trigger. So I'm really excited about that. Another emerging technology that you maybe, if you've got kids, are familiar with, and I don't know if this has started showing up on Christmas lists or not, but the virtual reality or the augmented reality technology that's out and available. So the Oculus, I think is what she's wearing there, the VR headset. We have seen that, and I know I don't see a lot of it here at Southwestern, but I know I've seen use cases for it typically showing up. You tend to see it in gaming and things like that, so that's how you see it at home as a consumer. But it's actually pretty incredible to use for like training, and especially right now when we're in a work from home setting, or you can't travel and you can't get out to the field, or you may not be able to get out to a drilling platform very easily. It's pretty impressive what you can do with this technology to create an experience that's very similar to a real life experience, using augmented reality. As a consumer, I'll tell you, I've been pretty impressed with when I'm on Amazon or Target's website, and it allows me to click on, a button that says, see this in your space. They are using augmented reality technology. So they'll allow you to see what that couch looks like in that corner over there, right? And before you buy it. And, it's not perfect, but it's pretty impressive, and it's come a long way. And so I know there are certainly use cases that, organizations are using. It's not a small investment because, again, there's hardware and very specific things that you need to make all of it work. But a lot of progress in this space. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, especially in this new world that we're living in, right, where we need to get smarter, faster, and there's nothing like on-the-job training, but this allows you to kind of accomplish the best of both worlds in a safe environment. So I'm really excited to see what's to come there. And the last thing I'll touch on, the Internet of Things. So again, if you guys have a Nest or a smart thermostat or any type of smart device in your home, you've experienced this technology, right? So you have sensors, you have a connected home. A lot of times you'll hear about the connected field or a connected plant, and so we do see a lot of these wearable devices I had mentioned earlier showing up across our industry. Again, lots of room still to grow and expand on this, but some really, really great use cases. Certainly from a safety standpoint that I had talked about, we see it being utilized for sensors, for asset management, and being able to communicate. And again, this is where something like Internet of Things and all that sensor data comes together with, with your data science solutions to really tell a story, right? Or to do some sort of predictive analytics, and you see a lot of that coming together. And so A lot of it's interesting where I felt like it was very academic, not easy to put into place, and required lots of investment to see that come to light. But the reality is that I think just about every organization probably has some version of this today. Whether you realize that if you're doing anything that's real-time data, it's using this technology. So it's pretty impressive what we're able to do. Again, a lot of times I see this showing up in more of our petrotechnical space, but I could absolutely see this translating into inventory management and things like that if it's not already. And so I think there's a lot more use cases. And again, even the concept of wearables that can be used day in, day out in the office, potentially. So I'm excited to see what comes with that as well. So I'm interested in hearing from you guys, because I've been doing a lot of talking. And I know we're getting close to time here. I want to wrap it up. But I'm interested in hearing from you guys, and we'll shift to our polling question here. What are you doing? And after we've talked about all these exciting type of technologies, what are you doing for yourself or within your organization to advance your own technology skills?
And while we have that kind of coming in, we've got a few questions here. Maybe we can talk through one while people are answering the polling question. Are there privacy concerns associated with the emerging technologies, specifically when they become integrated in the workplace and dealing with confidential or sensitive data?
So it's a big yes, is really the short answer. So certainly from a personal privacy, I mean, that's a topic, and that's front of mind for me as an IT leader every day, right? I am responsible for helping protect the information of our employees, and certainly in the productivity tools that you see that we all use as consumers as well, you know, that continues to be a relevant topic, that continues to be sometimes a very controversial one. So what's interesting is I think it's really important when you're looking at any of these emerging technologies that to be aware that, you know, you should always approach with caution, but you've got to balance that with, you don't want to hinder your ability to really utilize and take advantage of capability, right? And so typically what you do is you approach these with, let's target this use case, let's look at this as kind of a safe experimental space before you get into, now let me start seeing what I can do with that information where I'm tracking someone's heart rate, right, in a situation, or things like that from a safety standpoint. So it is constantly thought about, and it needs to remain front of mind, because as you collect more information, you are responsible for what you do with that information. And I know we even look at that because a lot of times that information doesn't even sit within my own environment. I may be relying on a cloud provider or a vendor that holds on to that information. So I've got to hold them accountable to make sure that they're keeping my information or my employees' information secure. And I've got to have checks and balances in place before we'd even agree to do that, right? So so that is something that is constantly front of mind. But I would say even as a consumer, I would really recommend, and actually one of my resources I talk about, I pointed you guys to, is called the Cyber Collective, where even as a consumer, you should be thinking about your privacy and what you're doing with your data and who has access to it. Because a lot of times we think it's really harmless that somebody knows where my location, you know, where I've been throughout the day, but it is, you know, borderline scary what they can do. It's also impressive, don't get me wrong, and super convenient, but there's a dark side to all of this that we also need to be mindful in this new world. And so there's a healthy level of paranoia that I would recommend we all kind of approach these emerging technologies with.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got our polling results up here now. It looks like learning on the job is the biggest one, followed by virtual trainings. And I know you have a few other ideas here at the end that we'll share with folks on how they can kind of learn more too. Any other comments or thoughts on these results, Seema?
Yeah, I'm curious on the other, did anyone put anything in the chat window? I don't think I can see. I'm curious because I think, I'm not surprised by learning on the job, right? I mean, that just is evidence of how quickly things are changing and how quickly we're trying to adopt and utilize these technologies. And we're just scratching the surface. So I think that excites me to see a lot of that happening, and a lot of virtual training and online courses. That's good.
Yeah. And we have a few more questions in the chat that I'll pepper through. I think after you kind of go through this, we can go through some questions. And since we're all so interactive, and thank you guys for being interactive on the chat, we'll we'll probably skip to the second breakout and just continue with Q&A and these questions here. But Seema, if you want to go ahead with this last slide here.
Perfect. So what I really just want to close with, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you guys, is the takeaway here is, I mean, there's a lot of cool things happening, and I'm really, truly excited for our industry. And again, hopefully the takeaway is, yes, while we are going through, you know, a tough cycle in our industry, what gives me hope and excites me is what more we can do, right? And with something that just we couldn't probably do 10 years ago. Some of these technologies didn't exist, right? And that we're able to apply and utilize in a way that we may not have ever thought about. One thing I want to highlight, especially with this audience, is don't be afraid and don't let the imposter syndrome or the, oh, I'm not an expert, or I got to stay in my lane, and so this really isn't something I should be spending time and effort on. Don't let that stop you from being able to embrace some of these technologies and learning more about them, right? Even if it just starts with reading a book or reading a few articles a day or listening to a podcast to help inspire some of your thinking, because I think it's easy for us to think, oh, I'm in this function and that's really not something we do. I'm going to leave that to the engineers or the Petrotechs, and that just really isn't the case, right? I mean, it is pretty impressive. Again, you as a consumer, if you think about the technology and what you're able to do as a consumer, tie that to what you're doing in your day-to-day, and that's going to amplify and just really drive our business and our industry going forward. And so that really excites me, and hopefully, again, not suggesting everyone leave here and you've got to go become a technologist or a data scientist, although there's certainly demand for that. But I will tell you, even as our industry shrinks a little bit, what we're finding is a lot of the talent that used to be a part of our industry, they're moving in those directions. That's a lot of where they're headed, right, is building on their capabilities, you know, their data science capabilities or their analytics capabilities. And I think there's a lot more opportunity out there for those that are even just trying to reinvent themselves. So I wanted to leave you guys with that. The last thing I would also encourage you to do is, you know, we talked a little bit about how do you apply these things and where do I start? I would encourage you, if you've never done this before, start small. And you don't have to start alone, right? If there's a problem that you've experienced or you went through something and you're like, gosh, there's got to be a better way to do this, start there, right? And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to go solve world hunger on day one, because those can be daunting and you tend to run into barriers, you know, early. And so I would encourage you guys to think about what's a targeted action that I can start? How do I, you know, work across generations or work across stakeholder groups and go reach over to somebody that I typically don't work with that's outside my function and pull them in? Because that's where we've seen the greatest value here at SWN is, you know, we're a leaner organization, the silos are broken down, folks are working across, you know, different functions left and right, and that's where that magic happens that I was talking about. And so, you know, don't be afraid to test something out and learn and learn together and start with a team that's small and then let it snowball. So, you know, once you do that, I think it's also important to celebrate and acknowledge and pat yourselves on the back, make sure you're advocating for yourself and show off a little bit, right? And let people know, hey, this is what we did, because that's going to spin off something else. And I think, you know, to me, that's what gets me excited. And again, I hope that inspires and energizes you guys to be able to take what we just talked about today and actually translate that into action. Because again, you'll continue to hear, you know, the future is digital and the workplace is digital, and that's happening now, and hold on, because it's about to take off even more. So I'm excited to be a part of that journey. So with that, I put some examples of some coursework and free courses and stuff like that, but I'm interested from hearing you guys questions or comments or what have you seen work well. So Jen, if you're good, we can open it up.
Yeah, I think we've still got quite a few questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read those all, a few of them at least. So machine learning and AI are very much buzzwords right now. Do you see companies falling into the need to change with the times mentality and forcing technology on business processes where it may not be the best fit?
So if I understand the question, I don't know that forcing the technology where it may not be, I don't see that happening as much. I think, and even my comment around, this is where I don't think a lot of, hey, the C-suite's going to force something to be effective, right? Because I've seen that time and time again. Again, that's when sometimes iPads turn into paperweights, right? And so, I mean, that's one example, but I think where you will see more of the growth is part of why I'm having this conversation and how I even encourage my team to do it. I'm not going to go out there and tell them, hey, you need to go and automate X and Y and Z. I'm asking them, go find those automation opportunities and let's make them happen, right? And let's support that, or let's go partner with our business folks because they're helping enable that, right? And so again, technology is an enabler, and that's the way I see it. But you can't just go and throw technology at a problem and hope it'll solve it, right? It's all about the people and process component to it. So hopefully that answers that question. I do think machine learning and AI is certainly going to have more of a role in the day-to-day, but I don't think we'll see that for maybe in the next 5 years or so. We'll start to see more of that. But right now, I think a lot of times that sits with your practitioners and your data scientists and folks like that, because it is, I mean, it requires programming. It requires, you know, it's a unique skill set is how I'll put it, right? It's not just, it's not as intuitive, let's put it that way. It's fairly complex. So, but I think a lot more people, just like we see with bots, you'll see that catching on and becoming more of a technology for the people, where you don't have to be a developer or a programmer to utilize a bot. You just have to understand a business problem, and there's software out there that allows you to kind of drag and drop and play and experiment and figure out, hey, this works, right? And then before you now kind of turn it loose into your day-to-day business and make it work.
Few comments I'll share. Someone had said that YouTube, Rhonda Bullard had said YouTube is a great training and development, or a training tool for emerging technologies. I can echo that for sure. We've got another comment that you're a technical rock star, so we'll give you that. We'll give you those kudos there. Last quick question: what emerging technologies, I guess just pick 2 or 3, is Southwestern using actively?
Yep. So I know we are certainly. We have a data science group that actually sits outside of the IT organization. It sits within our operations group, and that's by design. And they have been doing some incredible work and continue to translate that into a lot of value for our organization. And I will tell you, I mean, there's a number of these. Business intelligence is taking off more than it ever has. I mean, and it's not just showing up in Spotfire. We're shifting away from some of the other old reporting tools that came with our ERP and things like that, and shifting into Power BI. So we're just getting started with that. I'm really excited to see how that starts to explode. Bots I talked about earlier, that's one I know I'm personally going to make a push for across our organization. I know there's a lot more use cases out there, and I am so excited about seeing how that technology will be utilized to just free up our people so they can focus on the things that really matter and generating value for the organization. So I'm excited about that as well. But yeah, we've got some wearables and things like that out in the field that I know we're working with as well, and really trying to utilize that on the safety side as well, which is pretty exciting. So I'm pretty impressed with what our folks have come up with. I cannot take credit for this. These are all coming from the minds of our people who just, you know, had the grit and just the belief that there's an opportunity there, and drove it forward and found some really great use cases.
That's awesome. Well, I think we're about just a few minutes out to wrapping up. So what I'm going to do is thank you, Seema, so much. I think this has been valuable, and we can tell from our group being so interactive that I'm not the only one who thinks that. So thank you so much for your time. Before we wrap up, though, I'd like to share just a few upcoming events to keep everyone aware of what's coming through. We rescheduled our last week's luncheon for pretty obvious reasons, so that'll be coming in March, and you can see the other ones coming through here on the slide. They're free to members, and they're $15 for non-members, so we're excited for this lineup and hope you'll join our future events. So like Seema mentioned, she's given us some kind recommendations on this slide as well. So some books, some podcasts that she's had great things to say about. And we can also add in some of those trainings that she had mentioned on her previous slide, so you guys can work through those and kind of build up your skills too. So the last thing here, just want to make sure to remind you all to please update your WEN online profile with any new information so you continue to receive important news and reminders. Being connected is so important in this digital environment. So please connect with us on LinkedIn to get latest updates. So right with about a minute to spare, that brings us to the end of our luncheon today. I want to give one last thank you to Seema and a virtual round of applause for everything you walked us through. I found it really helpful. So Thank you all, and we hope to see you in person soon. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Jess.
Thank you.